you went under the wheels.
Affected.
Welcome to Under the Wheels. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Gabe.
And in today's very special episode, we are going to do some... we're going to delve into the zone of Soviet cinema and talk about Tarkovsky's... Well, would you say it's his best movie? Stalker.
Yeah, I think it's his best movie. At least from the ones I've seen.
The two you've seen or the three?
3. To be fair, he only has 7, so 3 is a lot, percentage-wise.
Yeah, that's... Yeah. Which 3 have you seen? You've seen Stalker, you've seen Andrei Rublev.
And Solaris.
Okay. Which one's the worst of those?
Solaris.
I think that one's probably the best known outside of, like, cinephile circles, because Soderbergh made a remake of it with George Clooney.
Yeah,
that no one
which
saw.
is weird. I mean, Solaris is good, don't get me wrong, but it's like, it's definitely not nearly as good as Andrei Rublev or Stalker.
So, like, because I know that Solaris is the most overt sci-fi because the whole thing takes place on, like, a space station. But, like, Stalker is also science fiction. And it's actually, like, the fun kind of science fiction for me, where it's, like, it seems so much like regular life, but in fact it has actually, heavily, like, the sci-fi element is so subtle. But I guess we should actually start by introducing the movie to people. So, Gabe, what's the movie about?
Okay, so in the future, the world has been devastated by an unknown calamity. And this calamity has caused a large area to appear called the Zone. And the Zone is a wilderness where the laws of physics are upended. And it's restricted, so no one can go into it. And at the heart of the Zone is a place called the Room. And anyone who enters the Room will have their heart's greatest desire come true. So there's a profession, there's these people called stalkers who are paid large amounts of money to take people on tours of the Zone, and they're specially equipped to navigate the kind of nonsensical world of the Zone and lead them to the Room where they can, their tour guests can make their wish come true. So this is about a stalker who is, kind of struggling, like, financially and psychologically, who takes 2 people on a tour. One is a writer who can't write and is in search of inspiration, and then the other is a professor who is hoping to make a scientific discovery.
So I think, like, the first thing that when I think of Stalker is this is terrible, but it's the runtime. It's not the first thing, but it is the first thing I probably want to talk about in relation to the plot. But go ahead.
Okay, so the movie is 161 minutes long, which brings it to
a little over 104. It's just over an hour, 2 hours and 40 minutes long.
Yeah, 2 hours and 40 minutes long. So it's actually shorter than I remember it being, because I thought it was 3 hours.
Right. So there's this weird thing that happens in the movie where it both feels like it's a 3-hour movie and does not feel like a 3-hour movie at all. I don't know if you experienced that when you were watching it.
Oh, yeah.
In large part, it has to do with the way the movie is constructed. I think you have more of the stats on it than I do, but I know that it's one of those movies that has like the length of shots, or the total number of shots in the movie is significantly less than the total runtime, which means every
so
shot lasts. Go ahead.
The film contains 142 shots in 160-ish minutes.
Yeah, which still seems kind of high to me, but yeah. So that means that all of the shots, like most of the shots, hold for longer than a minute, which means that the pace of the movie is slow. And like just looking at a plot synopsis on Wikipedia, the actual story of the movie, or the actual plot, I guess, of the movie is very simple. It's basically you get introduced to the stalker and sort of the issues of home life that the stalker is experiencing. He meets the writer who's hitting on women. They meet the professor, and then they go into the land. But just them talking about like the rules of going into the zone and setting up the zone and getting from the bar to the zone probably takes like 45 minutes, 40-ish minutes. And it's all sepia toned. But like in like an American movie, that thing would be done in like 20. They'd be like, hey, we got to get there earlier, got to get there faster. You got to get there within 20 minutes. And then the moments in the movie, like it's like they go from point A to point B to point C. They take a break. They get back up. Point C to point D to point E. And like in each of these things, something significant happens. But it like each of those moments takes its time to develop, and they explore, different motivations, different ideas, different philosophies. But like at the end of the day, when I look back at the movie, I'm like, it's like, it seems so short. There's like 8 events that happen in the movie that are like actual, like, things happening. But the movie takes its time establishing the environment, the area, the characters, that it's like the runtime is used to increase the richness of the world, in the sense of just like letting things breathe and happen on their own.
Mm-hmm. Tarkovsky movies tend to be fairly episodic like that.
Oh, okay.
Where it's not necessarily a plot that builds and builds and builds, but it's more like you have this overarching story, and the events that happen within it are kind of like are almost like different riffs on stuff, on kind of the overall movie. And they're linked by intuition more than cause and effect.
I think like I kind of knew a little bit what I was getting into because I had seen a video about the movie Nostalgia where there's just like a 10-minute long take of a guy walking back and forth as a candle slowly melts in his hand. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a movie where, the camera is set up in a certain position. Sometimes there will be camera movement, sometimes there won't, but things will just take their own time to develop. And like, to the cameraman's credit, there are some push-ins that take like 5 minutes, and they're like timed perfectly, so that it doesn't feel like, like the camera's moving in so subtle. It's either zooming in or dollying in so slowly, but it feels like the movie does a good job of establishing atmosphere, sense of space, and emotion, even through the actors who are, for a lot of it are just kind of like repressing their emotions until the emotions do explode, with the exception of the guy who plays as the stalker. You can kind of always sense what emotion is on his face.
Mm-hmm. The movies are very meticulous because they do have to time these long takes very carefully.
Yeah.
I think there's a famous bit about The Sacrifice, which I think was his last movie. There's a house that burns down and in a single take, and and he timed the demolition of the house, like all the explosives and pyrotechnics, so that it would burn down in exactly like 8 minutes and 10 seconds or something like that. And they had to do it twice. They had to do 2 takes of that. So they had to build the house back up and burn it down again, rigged like perfectly.
to just to like have that amount of control and let's just put it this way: there's no wonder he only made 7 movies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the thing with Stalker as well, kind of the fun facts behind the production, is that they had to make the movie twice because something happened to the film of the first time they shot it, where it got like really badly damaged, so they had to refilm the whole thing. And secondly, the zone in the movie was filmed in like this kind of industrial waste area in Russia. So everyone involved with the movie died of the same type of cancer about 10 years after Stalker was completed.
Oh my god! So like when they're going through the tunnel and there's all that like gunk, like disgusting water and everything, it's like that shit it was
They
like
killed them.
cancerous. Oh my god!
Yeah, it killed all the actors. Anatoly Solzhenitsyn. Sorry, not Anatoly Solzhenitsyn. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I think.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's
No,
Anatoly
it's Anatoly.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah, it's Anatoly.
Yeah, he died. Tarkovsky died. Tarkovsky's wife died because she was a PA. I believe the cinematographer passed away as well. Or no, he passed away later.
Didn't his original one of the issues was like he clashed with the original cinematographer, and that's that's another reason why they had to reshoot the whole thing.
That was another issue. Yeah, he and the original DP fought over the movie, and the DP got fired or something.
This whole thing is unworkable. We need a new guy. It worked out. How did you come by this movie?
I don't remember. I'm always on the lookout for strange and interesting movies, and when I read what this is about, the premise was so captivating. I was like, I have to see this. I don't know what it is, but I just know I have to see it. And when I watched it, I really liked the movie, but I think it's just kind of lived rent-free in my head ever since. Like it's a movie that I can't stop thinking about. No matter how hard I try. And I think whereas before I really liked it, now I think it's maybe one of the best movies ever made.
Okay,
because it's
yeah,
like it, at least for me, because it's just wormed its way into my head, and it's been 3 years or so, but it's like I think about it all the time. I think about like, God damn, Stalker,
So because my experience with it is there was a sale for Criterion Movies, and I said, hey, I need to buy one. What should I get? And like within seconds, you're just like, get Stalker. It's like, okay. And then it took me a while to watch. It doesn't take up as much room in my head because I haven't been dwelling on it for 3 years, but I do think about it a lot. So what keeps drawing you back to the movie?
I think it's a lot of things about it. I think just how beautiful it is. Like, it's one of the best looking movies around. The pacing of it, but also like what it's about, what it's trying to say, I think, and the questions it doesn't say so much as it thinks about things,
Yeah.
But it's like the questions it asks about the world, I think I've thought about every day since then, since I saw it.
So without, I don't want to get too personal here, but what kind of questions did the movie ask of you that you constantly meditate on? Because for me, a lot of what I think about is the production end, how it looks, how they got the feeling that they got, why this works, and why if they tried to do it in America, it'd just be a complete disaster. But it does ask a lot of, it wouldn't work. No, it'd be horrible. But when you came away from the movie, what questions did you have? And have those questions changed in your mind?
So in the movie, the 3 characters, as they're navigating the zone, talk about another stalker who was named the Porcupine.
Mm-hmm.
And the Porcupine, visited the room, suddenly came into possession of a huge amount of money, and then killed himself shortly after. And as the movie progresses, you find out that the Porcupine's brother died, and he went to the zone to try and bring his brother back to life. But the room recognized that his heart's greatest wish was not to bring his brother back, but to become extravagantly rich. So it granted him what he really wanted, which was actually much darker and more selfish than what he believed he wanted, which is, I remember when I said Wonder Woman 84 is just like dumb Stalker?
Yeah.
Because Wonder Woman 84 operates on the same idea. It's like if you can wish for anything you want, a lot of people would say they'd wish for world peace or an end to hunger or something like that. But instead, they all wish for really petty shit. Like that one guy's like, I wish you would just shut up, and then like the lady's mouth disappears or whatever. So, the porcupine wished for. The porcupine wasn't able to recognize the darkness inside himself, and so when he entered the room destroyed him, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Or it revealed the darkness within him, and he was so afraid and ashamed of it, he committed suicide. So then, when our three characters get to the room at the end of the movie, we're getting into spoilers now.
Yeah. No
one wants to go in. They all stand outside, kind of looking at the room, and they're like, go. No, you go. No, you go. No. And in the end, they kind of just turn back, and it's all kind of a waste. And the stalker then, when he returns home to his family, he gets very sick and starts ranting and raving about his sort of dissatisfaction with the world, and that he is always trying to lead people to the room, and no one ever goes inside. And I don't know, that was always very striking to me, because Tarkovsky was a very devout Christian at a time when being a Christian was basically illegal in the Soviet Union. And, I'm not a Christian myself, but my understanding of it is that in Christianity, salvation is just sort of there for anyone. All you have to do is accept it and you'll be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, I think The Room is kind of like that. It's like it is mankind's salvation. All you have to do is just go in with an open heart and accept being saved by it, in a way. And the stalker is constantly trying to lead people to this thing. He's a man of faith in the same way that Tarkovsky is. He's trying to lead people to this thing that'll save them. And they all refuse it because they're afraid of the darkness inside of themselves. So he starts to wonder, is it a lack of faith that they're not able to step inside? Or is humanity kind of beyond saving? Are people really so fucked up inside that if they do step into the room, horrible things will happen? Are we just beyond saving now?
Yeah.
And I think with the way the world has gone, especially in the last few years, I think about that a lot. Especially with the way that people seem to be under the impression we're living in these kind of apocalyptic times, and that's made people it's only made people more and more selfish, bloodthirsty, and crazy. So, I think about that a lot. Like what the stalker said is, can mankind be saved? Is there a way to turn back? to some better time that came before or create a better time in the future? Or if we are ever given the means to save ourselves, will we just use it for self-destruction?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's one of the sides of the movie that it does ask a lot of questions phrased in a way that is narratively contextualized, but also we talk about like what's that one thing that makes a movie shiny and chrome or practically perfect, and it's like it's able to transcend itself. It's able to use the medium to ask more important questions. Because I always think of like the writer, or even the writer and how he's going there in hopes of finding his muse, but but then he realizes that the muse that he's going to find, he's not going to find it in that room. He'll find it by other means. I don't know. Like, it's weird because the movie didn't have as much of an impact on me yet. And I say yet because there's a lot in the movie that I found interesting. Like the fact that the movie is all about these people getting to this room, and as an audience member, you have a lot of anticipation of, all right, they're going to enter the room and they're going to, like, this is what we've been waiting for the whole time. And it's going to sound cliche, but it's a movie that perfectly embodies the journey being the most important thing that they experience, the journey being what we watch. How going to an experience and experiencing something can change us, and how that change, reciprocates over us. So like for the writer is the one who sticks out the most in my mind, because the writer's really excited about this thing, and he's like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And then by the end, his whole facade as like a womanizer and successful and everything like that, it just fades away, and there's just nothing to him. He's just very bitter and angry, and ultimately realizes that he's not going to find any satisfaction if he goes in that room. And I think that's interesting, because it's almost like we get to witness the breakdown of these characters in real time, from a narrative point of view. So that's what I found interesting, and that's why I think the ability to tell the story in these really long shots, in this almost like chaotically beautiful landscape, shows, which it's almost like especially when you contextualize it as like, the harsh truth of it all. It's like this is represented by the photography. There's like this very harsh beauty of this destroyed landscape that's being overgrown by greenery and things like that, and you really get to feel all of it, all of this gross stuff that ultimately caused a bunch of people to die in a very depressing way.
Well, I mean, the long takes and just the generally long shot length really help the movie, because it does give you time to sort of sink into the world and sink into the characters. And when the characters have their character moments and they, experience a realization or some sort of change, you're watching it happen like unedited in real time. Yeah. Which I think is a very powerful tool. Like the professor brings like a nuclear weapon with him.
Yes.
Because he wants to blow up the room. He wants to make sure no one can use it for the wrong reasons, right?
Right.
And, the writer kind of convinces him, it's like, well, no one has insight into themselves, really. Like, no one really knows what they want, like the porcupine.
Right.
So even if someone who had bad intentions wanted to use the room for those bad intentions, there's no way of guaranteeing what they're going to get out of it. Yep. And that whole conversation, I think, happens it's only like 1 or 2 takes maybe. And it's a long conversation.
It is. Well, there's also a lot of poetry in the movie. I think it was one of those things that and a lot of the poetry is done in one long take. yeah, it's just, you feel like you're living in the moment, that the realizations are occurring in real time with these characters, which I think is just like, it's incredible. Or like the scene, and again, I don't know if this happens to you, but like I can see images flash in my mind of things like the tunnel and how, they have the contrast of the tunnel in there, and it doesn't really tell, like, I don't think about what it's trying to tell me. I just feel the emotion of the tunnel, or of all of the people sleeping. It's, the stalker tells them like, hey, this is a good time to take a break. Let's all, take a nap and sleep and recover our strength. And they just take this moment in the middle of the movie to have all of them nap and dream inside this surreal space. I also think it's effective because I know that they're not supposed to be in the zone for too long. Mm-hmm. And by having the camera hold on them for such a long time, you just feel like, I got anxious while watching the movie sometimes because I knew that they had only so much time to get to the place that they needed to go to. And instead of cutting around the movement, it's like we have to like experience it and see like, okay, but they're running out of time, aren't they? Aren't they going to like run out of time? How much time do they have left in this place? Like, and I just thought that was cool. And the fact that the physics didn't make sense, even though the world looked the same. The commitment to like the actors showing how like the space, like they're like, oh, you can't walk there, and they would all avoid that spot, and it just in my mind created the holes in there, like the illusion of the holes, like mm-hmm. if you're playing a video game and it's like, oh, the texture's there, but there's, if you step on it, you fall right through. Like I felt like I could see all of that. I could see how reality was bending around in this area, and they didn't use any visual effects. They didn't use any interesting tools except for camera work, performance,
and editing,
and a couple of props.
Yeah, because reality bends in ways that are not represented by special effects, like you said, where they'll walk into a tunnel or like walk into a building or a shack, and then the inside of it is like a labyrinth. They'll go over a hill and then be inside a building that was never there. Or they'll go through one landscape and then come out in a completely different landscape. So it's like there's no continuity in the world because the world has been upended by, I think it's supposed to be like extraterrestrial activity or something.
Yeah. I thought it was aliens came down or something like that. Yeah. It actually reminded me a lot of Annihilation.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if Annihilation is based a good bit on Stalker in some ways. At least some of the the idea of like a zone where the laws of physics have been altered by extraterrestrial activity and everything is weird and doesn't make sense to the way that we normally make sense of things.
Let me see. I'm trying to see here if, Annihilation, it had a lot of similarities with Roadside Picnic and Stalker. And like, I feel like, I don't know if this was the first movie to do something like this. I'm sure it wasn't, but it feels like this is the movie that did that sort of like alien zoning area thing. It's one of the best to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because like everything else that's kind of influenced by it, even to things like, you're gonna groan here, but like even things like WandaVision, where they have like the zone that it's being encompassed by, to Annihilation, to there was another thing I'd watched recently where there was like another zone, and I was like, all of these feel very derivative, either whether they're conscious of it or not, of Stalker, and how like, this is an area no one's allowed to go into, but it's an area people are going into, and the world is topsy-turvy. But Stalker's the only one where it feels like everything looks so pedestrian. But the fact that they have everything in the zone in color and everything outside of the zone in like a sepia tone also helps to enhance that sort of like the not quite realistic feel inside of there. Which is also like I almost got nervous. I was like, oh my god, is this whole movie gonna be like just like a giant orange tinted movie? Like I can deal with it, but it looks a lot like a movie out of the 1910s, not a movie out of 1979. You know, and it's probably like an old trick at this point. You know, you have your two different like they did it in The Wizard of Oz, for example, but it's so much more low tech and yet so much more effective in this movie.
I know.
In some ways, probably because it downplays the super special effects.
Well, it's because you know there's no special effects, so there's nothing that catches your eye as being fake. It all feels real in the way that movies feel real when you're just watching like shot reverse shot, for example.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you know there's nothing fake placed on the screen and it all feels real, but it still doesn't obey the rules of physics as we know them, or like the continuity of the world as we understand it. It kind of gets under your skin in a very subtle way, instead of being like an obvious, you know, hey, look, gravity is weird here. That thing's going up when it should be going down. It's just like it's like a subconscious thing. Like you consciously don't see anything weird or that strikes you as like, hey, that's weird or crazy, but your kind of lizard brain understands it as being weird or wrong, you know.
So what was the purpose of the nuts that they threw? Right, there were nuts, right? Or they?
Yeah. So I think the idea is that they're to test for traps or for where the path diverges. You know, because he says I think the straightest line is not the shortest path in the zone.
Right. Yes. Yep.
So like conceivably, if he threw one of those nuts to a place that was not the correct path, like it would get like sucked up into the air or be like, or, you know, vanish or something, and get warped into another part of the zone.
Right.
Whereas like if it just hits the ground normally, then you go that way.
Okay. Got it. I did look at the chapter listings when on the Criterion version of it, because there's only like you know, like 10 chapters maybe, and they're all listed based off of like the location that they're in at that time, which I find also really interesting because, again, like you were saying, very episodic, very experiential. It's like the events happen, but we're not, you know, but it is easier to break it down into like, as they get deeper into the area, the areas that they go into get narrower and narrower and smaller and smaller and smaller in our thoughts. You know, it starts like wide open field, you know, tunnels, house, you know, a shack, and then finally just the room, and we never get to see the room, which again is a weird satisfaction of its own. It's like even by the time we get to that point, as the audience member, even though we are wanting to see the room, we also are not like, oh, you know, it's not the little things where it's just like, oh, we're unsatisfied with this ending. It's like, okay, we get it. Maybe it's best not to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the
desires
smartest choice you could make, because the room is supposed to be like this incomprehensible place. And, you know, we've already seen so many like beautiful and awe-inspiring wonders on our journey to get there that like the smartest shot in the movie is the camera is placed inside the room looking out at our heroes who are standing on the other side of the door looking in. And I also like that there's rain that just comes from nowhere in the room. Like it'll just start raining suddenly even though it's indoors, and then it just stops.
I mean, that's what happens when you're in an area that makes no logical sense.
Yeah.
It's something that's incomprehensible. It makes sense that there's something else that's incomprehensible. What did you think of the very end of the movie? Is this like some sleight of hand? Because the daughter who, obviously the stalker is trying to find money for, but also adds to his life is miserable. All of this stuff in my life is miserable, and then she sits down and she's like using telepathy or telekinesis to move objects.
And she's in color.
And was she in color?
She's in color while all the other characters are, because in the real world is in sepia tone, and then the zone is in color.
Right.
She's in color as well because she is like from the zone,
Right. So the stalker never went into the room, correct? He just leads people there because he says he wants their desires filled, but
that's what he claims.
Right, but he has some other secret motivation behind it. Is it like his own need to have faith in humanity, that there is good in the world, or that there can be good, or like what exactly I know I'm going off topic here, but I do remember that was a major thing with because he forced the writer to go through this area that was extremely dangerous, and he's like, oh, but isn't it great? Like, you've improved as a person, you're tougher now, you're stronger now, like I helped you out. So is it his own sort of like internal desire to be like, I'm like, he can only be self-gratified through helping other people, but in a way that it doesn't necessarily help other people? Because I read that as he was just a coward trying to get out of it, and then post hoc rationalizing.
Well, I mean, I think it's true that everyone in the movie is a liar on some level, and they're all misrepresenting themselves in order to look good. Because I think, a big part of that is like, you can never, like, if Solaris is about how you can never really know another person, I think Stalker is about how you never can really know yourself. Everyone's a liar, not necessarily because they want to lie, but because they don't understand who they are. They don't know what they want, and that's very directly stated in the movie. No one enters. Right. Everyone's afraid to enter the room because they don't know what lies inside themselves.
Right.
And I think for the stalker, I think for him, he is maybe the most honest or most self-aware character, where he really truly wants to believe that people are good and that that they can be saved and that they're worth saving in a religious sense. And he is a religious person in the sense that he believes in the power of the room. He has faith in the room.
Right.
And its power to transform people and transform their lives. And so I think this is just my reading of it, but I think because he is so concerned about humanity's moral failings and is always wanting to prove himself wrong in that regard, when he pushes the writer in that way, he's trying to validate himself more than anything. He's like, see, you're like, you're capable of great stuff. You are a worthwhile human being who will benefit greatly from going into the room, which is why you should just go into the fucking room, man.
Does he get paid? Does he get paid if they go in the room?
He gets paid for taking them on the trip. Got it.
Okay. All right. So he makes money no matter what. And then, but then ultimately, and because I remember he was concerned, understandably, about the bomb, even though he's supposed to not be doing the stalker thing anymore. His wife chastised him in the beginning of the movie for continuing to do this.
Because it's affecting his health.
Right. And so I'm under the assumption that he had been a stalker for a long time, met his wife, they have the kid, but the kid is affected because he spent so much time in the zone.
Yeah, so it's obviously left to interpretation. I mean, the whole movie, Tarkovsky movies in general operate on kind of an emotional, subconscious logic as opposed to logic.
Okay.
So things are never really explained or
They're
elaborated
never
on
overtly, yeah.
in a factual way. It's more just like trying to demonstrate the feeling of something. And the feeling worms its way into your subconscious brain, and that's how you understand it. But yeah, for the kid, I mean, it's either that he spent so much time in the zone that he has become altered by it, and as a result, their kid came out the way she is, or that he lied about entering the room, and that his greatest wish, maybe the zone rendered him, sterile or something, and his greatest wish was to have a child, and that's what the room granted him.
Interesting. So I know that we've talked a little bit about the techniques that he uses, because I think you're right. To me, like I said, I see or actually feel more the imagery in the movie. I can almost feel the grass when they're sleeping on it. I can feel the cold, dark atmosphere of the cave. And so obviously one of the ways that Tarkovsky accomplishes this is by his long takes. But I also think the thing that goes under the radar that no one really thinks about is the amazing sound design in the movie. I think it's very underrated, but it's also incredibly evocative and effective.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was watching it, I think the thing that got me the most was trying to think, how is he creating this world? Because again, the story on the surface isn't that complicated, but there is a lot of, the character dynamics, the character performances. Like the guy who plays as the Stalker, there's just something about his face that just like he always looked like really concerned. He looked like a concerned Woody Harrelson the entire movie.
He does.
And
I mean, if you see a picture of him just out and about in real life, he does look like Woody Harrelson.
Yeah, it's or he did. And like I just think like, what tools is Tarkovsky using to create that evocative feeling? Obviously, like I said, the long takes are probably the one that's the most immediate and the one that you see the best. But I think also like the actors' performances do a lot to sell the movie as well. Like the way he's directing them, moving them or not moving them, also helps. And then also to a lesser extent, like you don't really think of, like I don't really think about it, but like the costume design in this movie is really, really incredible in a very subtle way.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's like every single thing was chosen very deliberately, and you can tell that everything was chosen very deliberately in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be.
Yeah.
They don't have the budget for mistakes, and the way Tarkovsky likes to make movies, you can't be making mistakes.
Yeah. Especially I wonder how many takes some of these things were. Like some of the shots. Like I feel like they had to just like heavily research it, and then if they messed it up, he's just like, we're just gonna keep going. Don't ever get out of the moment. We're just gonna stay here. Even if you make a mistake, just roll with it. Just roll with it because film stock is expensive.
Mm-hmm. Film stock is expensive, and we already blew an entire budget already on film stock that went bad on us.
It's like we were going to have twice as many cuts, but now we have to cut that amount in half.
We're going to have 2 shots a minute. Now we got to have less than 1 shot a minute.
Oh my God.
I mean, yeah, it's like the long takes are hard to get away from just because they're such a dominating part of his style, and how, you really do feel just like the weight of time passing.
Yeah.
And then he'll jump across. Like, he does this a lot in Andrei Rublev, especially, where, like, you're bogged down almost in the moment, and then he'll just jump across years of time in a cut.
I'm surprised at how many close-ups are in the movie. Like, close-ups that move to medium or wide shots, but still, especially because once you're in the close, you're in that close up for a while, and I just like every time it hit a close up, it was just like boom, which I also thought was really interesting, just because you wouldn't think that a movie that was gonna have as many long takes, and they're not dynamic long takes either. They are in a sense, but they're not in the sort of traditional American sense of dramatic camera movements, push-ins, zooms that are like, fast zooms. There's no real dynamic energy in the movie, except that's what's generated from the cast members, and then occasionally through some of the edits.
Yeah.
And the music, too. Every now and then there's a sound effect, and you're like, oh my god, what? Oh. So. I will say, when you saw the movie, did you see it in a theater? Were you sitting on a couch? Did you watch it on your computer? Did you watch it on a big TV?
I watched it on a big TV. So I got the Criterion Blu-ray as well during a sale years ago. And yeah, it was the first movie I got from that sale that I watched because I was so excited to see it. So yeah, I just watched it like on my TV at home.
Okay. Did you have, like, there were maybe like a handful of moments that I felt like I was kind of going in and out of, like, I'm not going to say paying attention, but I will say that there were a couple of moments that I felt my eyelids drooping, and then I would kind of wake up. So I guess I should be clear on that. Oddly, I think when that happens to me in certain movies, that helps with some of the feeling and the emotion that I get out of it. But which sounds kind of strange, but like, it's like it helps to add to feeling like, I don't know, it's weird. Because you don't strike me as the kind of guy who, when you're watching something that you really like, would ever like fade in and out. And I have noticed that on certain movies, especially movies that I like, I will sometimes like fade in and out of consciousness. But
that never happens to me. I mean, I will think about other things while watching any movie, no matter how much I like the movie, because I can't shut my brain off while watching movies.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Stalker works really well in a strange way because it is so slow and dreamlike.
Yeah.
That I think my mind actually calmed down quite a bit.
Really?
When I was watching. So I was just kind of sitting there, taking it in and enjoying it. And it felt slow to me for sure. And it was like,
yeah.
I think the only thoughts that really crossed my mind were, this is kind of slow. But that was it. Otherwise, yeah, it had my attention 100%.
It had my attention, especially on a conceptual level, because like I said, I keep thinking about the methods that were used in making the movie, the choices that were made. I loved all of the moments where they're either telling a story or they were reciting poetry. But maybe it's just because I'm getting like older and dumber. But like a lot of those moments I remember on like a visceral or an emotional level, but I would not be able to tell you what actually they were saying.
I think that's
poems.
the point.
Yeah.
I think Tarkovsky and David Lynch are very similar in that they both have reputations for being very obtuse, cerebral filmmakers, when I don't think that they are. I think that for both of them, the visceral feeling you get of a particular moment is more important than anything anyone said or anything that happened. It's not like Christopher Nolan where you got to pay like super close attention to every line of dialogue, otherwise you'll be completely lost as to what's happening. I think for someone like Tarkovsky or someone like David Lynch, you're supposed to get lost in the movie, in the feeling of the movie. And if you walk away with ideas of your own, not necessarily, like you said, not necessarily remembering what line of dialogue or particular thing triggered that's good. Because the idea that you get from it is more important than what's actually in the movie.
Interesting. Well, I feel better about my viewing experience. It's weird because I do like I did like I was excited to watch it because you recommended it. And I was nervous at first, but then especially as the movie gets going, after the wife has her weird freak out on the floor, I was like, what the fucking Gabe. Um, but after the wife has her freak out on the floor and like the movie starts going, and it does in a way kind of lull you into its story. Because at first I was thinking about, okay, how is it shot? And then, as the shots linger and no one's talking, but you're kind of taking in the environment, your eye naturally starts to wander around the frame. Okay, what's going on? What am I supposed to be looking for? And that's when you start getting lost in it. And I did genuinely I actually really liked this movie. It's one of those experiences of seeing a movie that you'll never really get that experience from anyone else. And those are the movies to me that are important, especially, because there are movies that you'll watch that it's like, oh my God, this was a terrible experience. I never want to have that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is I like movies that are different than what you normally see, that stand out in a positive way from movies that you normally see. And this was definitely one of them. And so it's weird for me to talk about I have this feeling that I don't remember the exact details of what happens in it. I remember a lot of the emotions. I remember a lot of the feeling I had while watching it,
Mm-hmm.
So
and I think, go ahead.
I'm happy that you were able to validate that feeling for me.
Yeah, well, and it's for me, it's been 3 years and I've forgotten a good number of details, like the dream with the dog. I only remembered recently after seeing a video about Tarkovsky, where you're talking about how the stalker kind of pushes the writer to go through a dangerous situation he feels really uncomfortable about. I forgot about that, but it's the feeling of watching that movie and everything that it conjured in my own mind has never left, and I think it'll always have a place in my head, for the reasons I described, because it is such a powerful movie, and it is so striking in that way, where it just sort of, you sink into it and it sinks into you, and then when you walk away with all these ideas and all these feelings and all these things that the movie seems to be saying to you, and that you have to think about.
So I have another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You bought it, you watched it 3 years ago, but have you been wanting to rewatch it? Are you afraid to rewatch it, or is it just a time thing?
All three. I want to rewatch it. I'm afraid to rewatch it. I'm always afraid to rewatch movies because I'm worried they won't be as good as I remember them. And
has it happened to you?
Also, it's really fucking long. So, it's a time commitment too. I actively try to seek out movies that are 90 minutes,
Yeah. Oh, hey, F for fake, 90 minutes.
Hey.
No, I know what you mean. I'm actually I was nervous to kind of jump back into the movie as far as oh, maybe I'll rewatch it because of the pace of the movie. I sometimes like slow movies, but I'm kind of like you. I'd rather watch something that's, either easily digestible or has an intermission that I can, take a moment and step away from if need be. But I am interested in rewatching this movie. I'm not as worried about the time commitment thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be interested in rewatching this movie again, even though I saw it earlier this year. I set aside some time. Just because I find that for me, on rewatch is when a lot of things that I wasn't sure about or that I didn't notice, that's when a lot of things tend to stick. So I might wait a year or two, but I do definitely want to revisit the movie, especially after watching some other Tarkovsky stuff. So
Yeah, I'd definitely recommend checking out Andrei Rublev.
that's the one I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Having read your review of it, but also just kind of with an understanding of what the movie itself is, I'm really excited about seeing that one when I get a chance.
Mm-hmm.
So, rating for, I think we know. Actually, no, I am curious about your rating for Stalker, because I think it's one of two things.
I would say it's a very, very high shiny and chrome. I think for a movie to be perfect in every way, I have to see it twice, and at least, and have that same reaction both times.
Interesting. I would say it's a very high shiny and chrome. I think it's. I'm just gonna copy your review for it. I think it's because I think it's one of those things that you see on an emotional level, and I think everyone should see it, even if people don't like it. Like, I feel like I can think of one or two people who wouldn't enjoy it. I think you will still get some sense of a journey out of it, which I think is the most important thing about the movie. And at best, it'll make you think and stick in your mind for 3 years. So.
Exactly.
Do you have any last minute thoughts on Stalker?
No, it's an amazing movie, and it's truly one of a kind. I mean, I think there's there's a lot of people who don't want to watch movies that aren't in English or in their native language, but if there was ever a reason to broaden your horizons a little bit, Stalker is the reason. And a profit.
The one thing I would also say is a lot of Soviet cinema, or what we think of as like, the Soviet cinema with like Sergei Eisenstein and what's his name, the guy who did Man with a Movie Camera. Mm-hmm. A lot of that stuff is very hard to approach. And I was actually nervous about Stalker because I know that Tarkovsky's known for his really long takes.
Also, if it helps, Tarkovsky thought Eisenstein was full of shit.
I think you can tell by the fact that Eisenstein had more cuts in like 5 seconds of one of his movies than Tarkovsky has in the entirety of his movie. Kind of shows that they're on completely different ends of the technique spectrum.
I think Tarkovsky said Eisenstein was too intellectual, and all he cared about was like creating intellectual and ideological meanings in his movies, and that in doing so, he created a very kind of limited and stunted form of filmmaking. And Tarkovsky wanted to do the most expansive type of filmmaking he could, and take advantage of everything the medium had to provide.
Instead of just one tool,
yeah.
I think that,
instead of just one tool for one purpose, it's every tool for all purposes.
And the fact that Tarkovsky transcended just being a Soviet filmmaker, like you said, Stalker was his last one. That was in the 70s. And then he started making movies. He made movies in Italy and Europe, and it's and like his movies have transcended him. They're still talked about today. Stalker wasn't well received when it came out, and now it's like it's seen as one of his best movies and one of the best movies, probably.
Well, it's funny that it was like not received well at the time, because like it wasn't received well by the Soviet government, because they're like, this movie's boring. But Tarkovsky said, the movie was like made a crap ton of money at the Soviet box office.
4.3 million tickets.
Yeah. So 4.3 million people saw it. And I think Tarkovsky said like, I don't care what the government thinks of my movie. I don't care if they think it's boring. I don't care if people think it's boring. 4.3 million people bought tickets and watched the whole goddamn thing. So it must be pretty good.
God, a different world. So I'll just comment on this a little bit because like we did mention that an American version of this movie would be horrible. And like I want to just say a little bit about the reason why it would be bad. For one, I think all ambiguity of the movie would be gone. It doesn't matter who they give it to, the ambiguity would be gone. The other thing is that like all of the really long takes, I mean, you could take this movie and cut it down, and instead of 2 hours and 40 minutes, you can make this movie an hour and a half, which is I think what they would do in America, where like they would just gut any sort of like emotional feeling of it. They would just obliquely ask, or not obliquely, they would ask obvious questions, provide obvious answers, give clear closure, telegraph very early on the fact that the room equals bad. The movie would lose any sort of dynamic atmosphere because it would be cut to shreds. They would probably add a bunch of side characters that add nothing to the movie.
Well, the reason why it would fail, the principal reason why I think it would fail, is that, you know, Stalker is so inextricably linked to Andrei Tarkovsky.
Mm-hmm.
It is his movie more than anything. It's his movie about his ideas and concerns and the things that he wants to think about and his views on the world. And his style that is carefully, specifically calibrated to talk about the things he wants to talk about in the way that he wants to talk about them. If you remove any of that context having to do with him, it stops working. You know, we had that conversation a while back about that Iranian comedy, The Song of Sparrows, or dramedy, I guess.
Right.
And how like a lot of the cultural stereotypes and things wouldn't translate to America. I mean, I think this goes even beyond that, where it's just like, it's like trying to take someone's consciousness and translate it into American popcorn cinema, where it's like they're so far apart from each other, it's not possible.
Do you think anyone could take the ideas and like maybe not make it, because there's two types of remake. There's the very direct, like we're taking your movie plot and remaking it in an American style, and then there's we're taking your movie's ideas and remaking it in an American style. Do you think there's any way to do the latter?
I think you could make a completely different movie about a completely different subject, that with a completely different style, and everything's completely different, but with the same concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Like same thematic concerns.
Still call it by the same movie name. American Stalker.
You know how you could remake Stalker and in an American style and kind of make it work? You could make Wonder Woman 1984. And like, I'm kind of kidding, but I'm also kind of serious, where Wonder Woman 1984 is, you know, it's stupid in the way that American blockbusters are exceptionally stupid, but it is about a lot of the same things that Stalker is about, and says or has a lot of the same questions that Stalker has, interestingly enough. So I would almost say that the best or the only viable way Stalker could be remade in America is as something like Wonder Woman 1984, where Wonder Woman 1984 is absolutely nothing like Stalker at all, except in that they're about the same thing.
That's oddly a pretty perfect place to end our conversation, I think.
I would agree.
If you guys listening to this find this kind of discussion interesting, please let us know. Email us podcast at underthewheels.com. Come interact with us. Leave comments at underthewheels.com. Make sure you're downloading the podcast, YouTube. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, downloading the podcast, leaving reviews, commenting, liking on YouTube, things like that really help. I know we try to keep this show pretty topical to what like movies are out right now. We've strayed a little bit from that with the pandemic, where there weren't any movies coming out for a bit, but we're now back to our old ways. But if you guys do want to hear more about stuff that is older movies, foreign movies, classics, weird things, please let us know, because we like doing these episodes, and we want to know if it's something that you guys are interested in.
On that note, music by Mike. I'm Matthew.
I'm Gabe.
And you've just been Under the Wheels.